Tell me where the watch is, and we all go our separate ways.
I'm telling you, I don't know about any watch.
Okay, let's just see.
Look, I don't know. No, please. Will you? Please. Okay. Just stop, please. I'll tell you. Just don't hurt him. Please. The watch is in
Fuck, that was brutal.
I love time loop stories, and 12 Minutes is perhaps one of the more interesting ones to have come out this year. Its premise is a simple one. You play the husband character, voiced by James McAvoy, and you've just come home from work to a nice little surprise from your wife, who's played by Daisy Ridley. Over the course of the evening, there's one thing that stands out during your house date with your wife. Your wife reveals that she's pregnant, and she wants to name the baby Dahlia after your mother. But after she reveals this, there's a knock on the door. It's the police, he says. You let him in. The cop, played by Willem Dafoe, accuses your wife of murdering her father 8 years ago, and he ties both of you up during the encounter. She denies this, but there's something she isn't telling the man, and there's something she definitely isn't telling you. For some reason, the man is looking for a watch. You don't know why, but it's important to him. It's important enough that your wife is keeping it hidden. The cop, in his anger, begins to strangle you in an attempt to get your wife to tell him the truth. She eventually relents, but she's too late. You're already dead, and you didn't even get to hear a word she said. Instantly, you wake up 12 minutes before your death. You've just come home from work to a nice little surprise from your wife, and she tells you the same thing she told you earlier. And that's when you realize what just happened. You're stuck in a time loop. So maybe I lied a little when I said that the premise is simple, but I only said that because the story's premise is actually pretty easy to understand despite it being a fairly complex situation. I mean, here's the gist of it. A violent, mysterious man accuses your wife of murder. Your wife seems to know more than she's letting on, but you die before you can figure it out. Solve the mystery. And boy, is it a mystery to solve. There are a lot of little twists and turns and little details you need to catch. And if you really want to solve this mystery, you're going to have to try your hardest to uncover each piece of it. But is this mystery worth solving? Let's take a closer look at 12 Minutes, a disturbing time loop game that might just be worth your while.
Don't fucking move. Fuck.
Before I say anything else, I'm going to warn you that this video is going to be filled with heavy spoilers. If the premise interests you in any sort of way, it's time to turn back now and play it yourself. You've been warned. Anyway, before I take a deeper dive into the story itself, I want to take a look at the game's primary mechanic first, its gameplay loop. Every time you die or leave the apartment, or even if you somehow manage to survive longer than the 12 minutes you're stuck in, the game whisks you right back to the moment you first enter your home. Now, the best part about this is that you retain all of the information from your previous loops, and the more you learn, the easier it is to control the chaotic situation unfolding before you. For example, when you first realize that you're stuck in a time loop, it's impossible to convince your wife that you're stuck in one because you just don't have enough information. But as you learn more, like learning when thunder is about to strike or learning what your wife wants to name the baby, you can convince her of what's going on. But that's not all. As you further uncover the truth about her father's murder, you can convince your wife even quicker than before, and you can develop a plan with her. This opens up a ton of new potential scenarios for you to play out. I'll admit that the gameplay loop can be frustrating if you don't know where to go and if you don't know what questions to ask. But I personally found it to be a relatively intuitive experience, so it didn't bother me too much that I had to repeat some scenes over and over again in order to figure out what I needed to do next. So if repeating things isn't your forte, then this game might not be for you, because repeating things is the entire appeal of this game in the first place. As you learn more about you and your wife's past, and even of the cop story too, you use this information in subsequent loops to unravel the mystery until it's all laid out in front of you. And to defend this game's repetitive nature, I will also say that the repetition isn't too grating because you can skip through the dialogue fairly quickly. And if you messed up at any point, you can just walk outside and reset the day again and gather your thoughts on what to do next. At its core, 12 minutes requires you to think. You can just experiment and mess around until you get something right, but doing that will probably make this game a lot more frustrating for you than it needs to be. As gamers, I think it's easy for us to fall into the trap of mindlessly playing the game rather than stopping to think about things for once. And if you do that, you're definitely going to be annoyed when you end up doing the same thing and failing. That's where the time loop mechanic works best when you start each day off with a plan. Of course, you do need to experiment in order to figure out how certain things work, but each failed experiment is another thing to check off your list of things to do. Every time one of your plans does manage to succeed, it's a great ass feeling. It means your plan worked, and it means that the next loop will have even more things to explore and figure out. And with each successful plan, you uncover more and more of the mystery. It's an incredible loop that has you wanting to figure out more. There's this moment in the game that really made me buy into the gameplay loop more than anything that came before it. At the beginning of each loop, you can prompt your wife to start your little date night, and every time this happens, she goes to the bedroom to grab your present. And when she does this, she always gets shocked by the light switch, a detail that's actually really important to catch and remember. Once you realize how important this is, you can set off a chain of events that causes the cop to get shocked by that switch. You just have to figure out how you would do that. And that's where your deductive reasoning comes in, and that's where the gameplay loop is at its strongest. When you use all the information you've learned about the next 12 minutes to change what happens next. By putting your wife to sleep by drugging her, she won't have the opportunity to answer the door and get handcuffed or killed by the cop. Since she's knocked out in the bedroom, that's where the cop is going to check. But he'll only check there if you're hiding, because now he doesn't know that there's someone else in the house with her. Once he inadvertently discovers her, of course he's going to be shocked. Literally. He turns on the light to investigate and gets shocked unconscious, and you can use that opportunity to sift through his pockets and learn more about the man. There's a whole lot you can learn in that instance, and there's a variety of things you can do to the man to extract more information from him. But the most important takeaway here is that paying attention is important. And the fact that the game makes you think like this is what makes its gameplay loop so engaging. It made me feel like I was really paying attention and that I was pretty damn smart for it. But since this is a narrative-focused game more so than a mechanics-focused game, the game is only as good as its story, right? We could be looping and looping and looping, and at the end of it all, even if we're entertained by the fact that we're going back in time and solving things, if the story is in any way terrible, then it doesn't feel worth playing. So, here's the big question. Is the game's story good, or is it bad? Well, it's complicated. Let's take a look at the story next, and let's figure out if the plot of 12 minutes is just as clever as its gameplay loop.
How he really died.
I don't know what you think, but you better.
It was Christmas Eve. He caught you sneaking out. He hit you.
How could you?
I couldn't, right? You told me in a previous loop.
What?
Look, I'm on your side.
On my side? Oh God. Look, I didn't know how to tell you. Please, talk to me.
One of the most important goals of narrative writing is being able to evoke a certain mood and tone in your story, to the point that the audience actually feels those associated emotions in their physical body. And this goal is something that 12 minutes is able to accomplish almost flawlessly. Let me explain. How you feel is what makes you remember a story the most. How you feel is what makes you either have passion or hatred for something. How you feel is what dictates your ultimate opinion on whether or not a story did a good job. Think, for instance, about how a game like Amnesia or how Silent Hill can make you feel. Those games are well known for how powerful their settings are and how well they're able to evoke certain moods out of you. They can strike enough fear into you with their eerie mood and tone, to the point that you can start feeling the hairs rising on the back of your neck, to the point that you can start seeing goosebumps on your arm, to the point that you can start hearing your heart racing, and so on and so forth. I'm not saying that 12 minutes is anywhere close to as good as Amnesia and Silent Hill are, but the game is able to accomplish something very similar with its story and its setting. But, like all things that are subjective, not everyone is going to have the same feelings that everyone else does. A certain plot point might make someone roll their eyes, and at the same time, that same plot point might make a different person jump out of their seat in excitement. And to me, 12 minutes has a very specific mood that it evokes extremely well. It captures just what it's like to have a never-ending nightmare. At almost every turn, there's this heavy feeling of dread, fear, and anxiety. The anxiety that something very, very terrible is about to happen. And the game makes you feel this way immediately after the first loop. James McAvoy and Daisy Ridley both give a decent enough performance on what it's like to be stuck in this awful nightmare. The hesitation, the fear, the pressured quivering in their voices is enough to make things feel anxious. Because you, the player, can feel their anxiety in your own bones.
Only question is how much you make me hurt you before you do.
I don't know about anyone.
Keep lying. See how creative I can get.
Help! Help!
You don't want tonight to happen. You don't want that cop to show up at your door in 12 minutes. You don't want to hear terrible things about your wife. You don't want to be killed. But it's all going to happen, and there's very little you can do to stop it. And that's where the feeling of dread comes in. Something terrible is always looming around the corner. And when it comes, when it terrorizes you and destroys you, whether it's you or your wife dying, whether it's you finding out a disturbing secret, or whether it's you hurting your wife for the sake of learning something new, you wake up just to start the process all over again. Like I said, a never-ending nightmare. And if you think you can get away from the anxiety, you can't. The 12-minute time limit, which is actually much shorter than that, causes you to feel rushed and hurried. And each time you open the menu or look at your inventory, you just hear that hastened ticking noise reminding you of what's coming. Death. But, of course, a story is more than just its mood and its tone. Powerful narratives are made up of so many other components. You've got your theme, your plot, your setting, your characters, and so much more that helps the reader fall in love with the story. But I want to focus on the plot here more than anything else, because the plot has everything to do with what makes or breaks this game for people. And the plot is the consequence of all the other components clashing together to create a story. You need strong characters with deep, complicated motivations to drive the plot, and they must be in a compelling enough setting to draw in the audience. A thought-provoking theme is the cherry on top. And sadly, here's where things start to fall apart for the game. The overall mystery that you need to solve is actually quite compelling during the process of unraveling it. But when you unravel it too far, when you start exposing all the little details, it just isn't that compelling anymore. Let me explain what I mean. Pretty early on in the game, you figure out that your wife killed her father by accident during an argument provoked by his years-long abuse. It's a pretty standard, generic twist, but it goes deeper than that, and that's when the story is at its best. The situation is far more complicated than some random cop simply wanting revenge on your wife for killing her father. And when you try to figure out why, it's actually a pretty engaging story. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. Did your wife actually kill your father like she said she did? After all, the cop said that he was murdered on New Year's Eve, but your wife was hundreds of miles away on that day. And you find proof of this too. If she didn't kill him, who did? And why? And what relationship does the cop have to her father? Why is he looking for a watch? Unfortunately, the answers to these questions are either unsatisfactory, non-existent, or ridiculously convoluted. Your investigation to find these answers is compelling and engaging, yes, but when you actually do find those answers, you're just left feeling like there was a better, more intriguing answer. For example, who is the cop? Well, you find out that he's just someone close to your wife's father. That's it. It's never explained how he's close to him. If he was actually close to your wife's father, wouldn't you think that your wife would have known him? I think that the cop is actually supposed to be your wife's father and that this game is just some hypnotic dream sequence of the potential future. But I'll get into that later. And another question. Why is he looking for a watch? Well, his daughter has cancer and he wants to sell the watch to pay for her treatment. There's apparently nothing else special about that watch except for it being potential evidence of your wife's involvement in her father's murder. It's just such a generic answer to what could have been a more complicated mystery. Of course, the real mystery of the game centers on your wife's father's murder. So, if she didn't do it, who did? And why? Well, here's where things get real ridiculous. Your wife's father cheated on his wife for years with a nanny. This was a source of many family arguments, especially when it led to the nanny's pregnancy. The nanny then had the child, a boy, who your wife's mother often called a monster. This is an important detail because according to the cop, the last word your wife's father says before his death is monster, meaning that your wife's half-brother, who is the nanny's son, killed their father. So, why did your wife's half-brother kill their father? Well, it's not going to be an answer you like, that's for sure. If you want to find your wife's half-brother, you need to find out more about the nanny, his mother. But the thing is, your wife doesn't remember her because she left when she was 2 years old. The cop isn't too much help either. It's been too long since the nanny left, and the only detail he remembers about the nanny is that her name is some sort of flower. But that hint will bring you to this game's biggest twist. Remember the baby your wife talked about at the beginning of the game? The one that she wanted to name after your mother? Yeah, Dahlia. And Dahlia is a flower, so you know what that means, right? Your mother was the nanny, and that means, yeah, you killed your father, who is also your wife's father, which also means that your wife is your half-sister, and she's pregnant with your baby, and you killed your father because he was angry about your relationship with your half-sister, a relationship that she didn't know was blood-related until now. Oops. Twisted, right? I mean, unlike a lot of other people, I actually don't think that this twist is too bad. I thought it was dark and fitting for the game's tone. It's just kind of a twist that requires too many convenient things to happen. And because of this, it doesn't feel like it's earned. Like, how does your character just forget that he killed his father? And how does he forget that he's the offspring of a man who had an illicit relationship with the house nanny? And how does he forget that he was in a relationship with his half-sister that he was knowingly aware about? This shouldn't have been a mystery in the first place. The protagonist should have known from the start what the hell was going on. But there's an explanation for this. I'm not too sure what's real and what's not in this game because it's kind of a surreal experience. But if you open up the pocket watch that the cop has been looking for the entire game, you can go back in time to the evening your father confronts you for being in a relationship with your half-sister. And he gives you two options. For the first option, you can tell him to fuck off and you'll keep fucking your half-sister, which leads to the argument that causes your father's death. This one doesn't make any sense, because how the hell do you conveniently forget about all this and you're suddenly shocked that you're in a relationship with your half-sister? For the second option, you can tell him that you'll just disappear from your half-sister's life and she'll be none the wiser. This leads to an ending where you're all alone in your apartment and there's nothing else you can do. But there's a secret third option, and I think this is supposed to be the canon true ending. Throughout the game, your wife is reading some book on meditations, and if you can actually get her to share some information about it with you, you can get this ending. That same book is on your father's bookshelf, and if you tell him a quote from the book, he'll tell you that there's another option for you. Your father can make you forget everything about your history. Who you are, who your mother really was, who your father really was. Basically everything in the story that would have conveniently solved this mystery in the first place. And if you accept, he uses the book and some hypnotic powers to make you forget about most of your life. And since you forgot everything, that's what leads you to continuing your relationship with your half-sister and not knowing a damn thing. But this ending doesn't make any sense either, because doesn't your father not want you two to have a relationship? Maybe he just doesn't care since you'll never find out, and I guess he's always been a pretty terrible father. So maybe this ending does make sense. Either way, the ending is an odd one. It's hard to know if the cop is a real person and if this time loop is actually a real experience, because Willem Dafoe plays both the cop character and the father character at the same time. So it's entirely possible that both the cop and the time loop are just some sort of manifestation of your memories trying to come back after being erased, and the cop is just a vehicle meant to provoke you to investigate you and your wife's past. If that's the case, then this is how the ending went. You got into an argument with your father for being in a relationship with your half-sister, so he erased your memories so both you and your half-sister wouldn't get hurt by the idea of such a horrible relationship. Then, after finding out what your wife wants to name the baby, you trigger some sort of fucked up dreamlike experience in your head that allows you to gain those memories back. And if this is what the actual ending is, then the ending is a serviceable one. It's not the worst thing ever written, but it's also not the best thing ever written. At its best, the story is okay, and not everyone is going to like such a dark ending. But for me, I thought it was decent, and it managed to keep me engaged all the way up to the end, which isn't something that all stories can accomplish. So, knowing what we know now, what's my final verdict? 12 Minutes is an ambitious time loop story that sometimes pulls too many twists and turns to its own detriment. It raises questions that it doesn't have the best answers to, but regardless, the mystery is strong enough to keep you guessing, and it's just engaging enough to keep you intrigued and invested in its ultimate end, even if that end might not be the most glorious or original of endings. The game, despite its faults and flaws, is elevated by an assortment of clever puzzles, a subjectively engaging gameplay loop, and a mystery that does manage to keep your attention even at its weakest points. And when 12 Minutes is at its best, it manages to evoke some powerful emotions and feelings through its dark, depressing mood. It's no Outer Wilds, but it's definitely a time loop experience that shouldn't be ignored. Would I recommend this game? Yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily think that you'll enjoy it. You need to be in a particular headspace for this game, and you have to be willing to embrace its more repetitive aspects if you want to truly enjoy the experience. And I don't think everyone can do that. Either way, it's not a very long game, so I think it's worth a shot. But seeing as how I already spoiled quite a lot of the game by now, you probably have an idea of what your opinion is about this game. So, whether you played it or not, let me know in the comments what you think. This is a pretty divisive one. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content similar to this. I make videos about all things writing related. I'd also like to thank my patron Edith Lopez Torres for helping make this video happen. If you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon. I'll leave a link down in the description below. And if you've got some time, check out some of my other videos too. I really appreciate you watching this one. And to everyone who made it to the end here, thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.